All right, guys, what's going on? Welcome back to the Everything College Football Podcast. Today, me and Nick here, we do our 2024 preview and prediction for the Florida Gators. This is the team the last 2 years, Nick. I've been spot on with their record predictions, so I got a pretty good grasp of what's going on here in Gainesville. Billy Napier returning as head coach, 51-26 career record, 7 seasons under his belt, mainly from Louisiana Lafayette days. Rob Sale, third year in the role as the OC. Arston Armstrong will be joined by Ron Roberts as defensive coordinators. And, of course, the headlines, the first top 10 recruiting class since 2020 went 1-5 over the final 6 games, allowing over 38 points per game during that stretch. And they haven't had back-to-back losing seasons until last year, since the late 70s, Nick. So, obviously, a lot of tension in Gainesville right now. Looking at this Florida offense, it's a unit that I thought was a little bit better than anticipated. Landed 7 guys in the portal this offseason, lost 12. A few offensive linemen on the interior. And then Trevor Etienne is a massive departure as well. They return 8 starters. And outside of losing the number 1 pass catcher, Ricky Pearsall, and, of course, the aforementioned Etienne, this is a unit that gets mainly most of their players back. Graham Mertz, a guy at Wisconsin we felt certainly wasn't in the correct system, but we didn't expect him to have a complete breakout season like he did. A guy that showed good movement out of the pocket, made accurate throws on the move, showed nice downfield touch and feel in the pocket. He can certainly improve. They were, fumbles didn't, help his cause one bit. He didn't throw too many picks, but he does a good job of layering the ball in the middle of the field. Doesn't have the strongest of arm. The vision across the middle and hitting his checkdowns is certainly sporadic. So a lot to work on for Graham Mertz, but overall, this is a guy that carried this offense, Nick. 2,900 yards, 20 touchdowns, only 3 interceptions. What did you make of his breakout season?
Certainly an impressive turnaround for a guy in Graham Mertz, that when he was originally committed to Florida out of the transfer portal from Wisconsin, everyone on social media, clown the move, saying, "Oh, what is Florida doing? They're going to lose a bunch of games this year. They don't have a quarterback. Mertz can't play." The quarterback room looked like it was in shambles in the post Anthony Richardson era. But Graham Mertz just blew away everyone's expectations. Now, I figured he would have a step up in production at Florida by getting out of the system at Wisconsin, where it really isn't beneficial for the quarterback at all, where they really do focus on grounding out, running the ball, and Mertz was just not in a good setup with not great pass catchers around him. But going down to Florida, obviously grabbing a guy like Ricky Pearsall certainly helps, but I did not imagine him to have this sort of season. The number that really stands out to me is the 72.9% comp rate. He was very accurate. He was getting his passes exactly where they needed to go. 20 touchdowns to 3 interception ratio is another important number to look at. 8.1 yards per attempt, 2,900 yards total for him across 11 games. 6'2", 215. I like the frame on Mertz. I think he's really solid in the pocket. The fumbles, the sacks are certainly something you got to worry about. I think those are 2 concerning issues. But outside of that, he had a phenomenal season. That accuracy rate, 72% comp rate is just a very impressive number in the SEC, considering the talent of defense they're playing against week in, week out. He looked very comfortable, read the routes very well, and this offense could really be successful under him this year as he gets another season to learn the playbook, another season of reps with mostly returning his wide receivers outside of that number 1 receiver who was drafted the NFL draft. I think Graham Mertz is a fantastic quarterback now that he's in this great system down here in Florida, and he can continue to really shine in this setup.
He also had 32.5 attempts per game, so that completion percentage even more so impressive. Of course, backing him up will be 5-star DJ Lagaway, who could potentially find his way onto the field, but I think Mertz is certainly going to run away with it at this moment in time, especially with this receiving core he has. Eugene Wilson, I think this guy's going to be one of the biggest breakout stars in the entire country. Last season, he showcased explosiveness with a ball in his hands. He was used on jet sweeps plenty. I love his quick feet. A great first step really allows him to thrive on his release. Very effective on slants. Using a variety of alignments, elite hands, no drops all season at 5'10", 181. This guy's going to completely blossom, I think, this upcoming season. You pair him up with Shamiri Dyke, a guy from Wisconsin, 6'1", 195, good frame. Started off the year with good production, not much after that. Underrated athlete from Wisconsin. Good yak, finds open space. I think this is certainly a player that's going to, also find some increased production in this Gator offense. And then recently, Nick, Elijah Badger from Arizona State, a guy I was very intrigued to see enter the portal. Final 3 for him was the Gators, Arizona, and Washington. So for the Gators to go out there, outbid those teams on the West Coast for a physical pass catcher who's great after the catch with some good speed underneath. I think he creates space vertically very well. Like his route running. He's also pretty solid at tracking the ball at 6'1", 190. Obviously been playing in an interesting system at Arizona State the last 2 seasons where they haven't won too many games. But going over to the Gators, that's a great plug for them. And that shows that the prowess that Billy Napier has right now when it comes to recruiting, Nick.
I think the hate that Billy Napier gets on the recruiting trail is not justified, considering he makes out there and grabs a guy in Badger from Arizona State. Tough to pull, beat out those West Coast schools, and I think you can plug Badger in at your Z there, and he's going to be a fantastic wide receiver. I like the frame on him, really solid player top to bottom. I think, getting Dyke from Wisconsin as well, a guy familiar with Graham Mertz a little bit, very helpful. And Eugene Wilson's a great player to return in 10 games last year, 61 grabs for 538 yards, 8.8 yards per grab, and 6 touchdowns for him. A really versatile player as well. You can move him around, play him basically anywhere in this offensive setup. I think Wilson has tons of potential to shine as a wide receiver for this team here. These top 3 wide receivers, Wilson, Badger, and Dyke, I think are all phenomenal athletes, really solid frames on them, and they could really fit into a variety of different roles for Mertz to throw the ball to them.
And they have some nice depth in this receiving room as well. 2 redshirt freshmen should see larger roles. Andy Jean, he was a game breaker in high school with his speed and stride. I think he's got some solid power as well. Aiden Mizell at 6'1", 180, he has elite speed. Khalil Jackson, he had the 3rd most targets on the team. He didn't do much with them, though. Had 2 games of 50-plus yards. They do have a 4-star in Tank Hawkins from IMG Academy. Great route tree. Also has elite speed. Relatively young group, but lots of potential here. I love the starting 3 they have. Interesting to see the creativity they have in store, because they do have a lot of speed. Tight end Artless Boardingham, he was productive mid-part of the year as a freshman in his own right. So this is a pass-catching group, Nick. Right now, a lot of people don't know about, but I'm telling you, these guys are going to be good. And again, Wilson, I think he's going to be one of the top 10 receivers in all of FBS.
I think Wilson has a ton of potential. I like Jackson as well, 6'3", 215, 11 games last year, 251 yards, and a touchdown for him. I think when you look at Boardingham, he's a really solid, nice frame tight end. I think Hayden Hansen as well is a bigger tight end at 6'6", 272. He had 2 touchdowns last year and 150 yards across a few different games, so he could be a nice threat there. They like to use 2 tight ends occasionally in this system, so it could certainly work out there. I think this wide receiving core has nice depth. These are guys that are all primed to break out, in my opinion. When you have a quarterback that's very accurate, your wide receiver skill set doesn't have to be as high if the wide receivers don't have to go out and make incredible plays to make grabs and things like that. If they're going to be hit in the hands basically every single throw, as long as they don't drop the ball, they can really get nice catches and nice move the ball up the field at a nice click with Mertz being so accurate.
Looking at this offensive line, a unit that wasn't all that great last year, 113th in sacks. You look at a big transfer they added, though, from San Diego State in tackle Brandon Crenshaw-Dixon. This guy does a good job of moving laterally with wide feet, has good movement skills, understands his assignments very well, 6'7", 315. Thought he did a good job anchoring at pass pro. Doesn't have great strength, but his athleticism really allows him to get to the second level well. Can play either tackle spot, 2,400 career snaps, none of them at guard. Can likely play if they needed him to. That looks like they're going to pencil him in somewhere in one of those tackle spots, probably right side, as Austin Barber is currently slated to return on the left side there. Good length from him, has shown nice pop in the run game. Good at the second level, good depth in pass pro on his drop back. Somewhat stepped back in pass pro, no pun intended. Needs some big technical refinements in anchoring and against stunts. His chest is often exposed as well. Another player at 6'6", 316. What do you make of this tackle duo here, Nick? I think they're certainly poised to be better than they were, but the uptick in competition from the Mountain West to the SEC is certainly going to lead to some growing pains.
I think Crenshaw-Dixon's a player that's a veteran player, a senior, has some years under his belt at San Diego State. A nice get. Again, Billy Napier heading to the West Coast and grabbing a talented player, 6'7", 315. Guy's a complete people mover, really solid on that right side. Very good flexibility there. I do think you pencil him at right tackle. Makes a lot of sense for me. I think Austin Barber's a good player to return, 6'6", 315. Nice size there as well. Good hands, nice footwork as well. Solid in pass protection. I think he's really good. It starts on the ends with the offensive line, right? You got to have tackles that are really productive, protecting the blind side of your quarterback here. I think you have a nice duo in Crenshaw-Dixon and Barber here to kind of build up and start with your offensive line.
Now looking at a guy they're going to plug in at guard, Kanijah Harris. A player who's going to be a full-time starter now. Great upside, at least in my opinion. Great in power gap calls. Movement skills allow him to be good in zone as well. Very impressive strength, 323 pounds on him. They really didn't have all that many natural tackles on their roster last year. Damian George really struggled at both tackle spots. They're going to move him inside the guard, 6'6", 350-ish. More of a natural fit with his power. Should be an asset in outside zone plays. Rob Sale's happy with the new depth at tackle. Devon Manuel, he was pretty average at left tackle for Arkansas's last year. 6'9", 310 pounds. Cameron Wades has lost some weight, down to about 6'8", 350. So still a massive frame on him. Caden Jones, a redshirt freshman, Mahler mentality, who's still bulking up his frame and strength. He's got some flexibility as well for 6'7", 336. And of course at center, Jake Slaughter really emerged big time for them. Kingsley Ugkun, he went down at one point, and he just was phenomenal in his replacement. Does everything right. He's a good leader, good communicator. Richard Kearney, 6th ranked interior offensive lineman in last year's class, and then top 50 recruit transferring in from USC. And Jason Zadamela offers some more experience there, or upside that is in terms of young guys. The offensive line's making good strides, Nick. I think they have great size as well. High upside here. They need to develop these guys, though, and that part of the equation is certainly kind of iffy.
You got to win the battle in the trenches in the SEC. It's a big, heavy league, and you got to continue to fight that battle inside and out. Jake Slaughter's a good leader return at center, a guy 6'4", about 300 pounds. I do like what he can do. I think Harris at left guard. They're going to expect a lot out of him as a true sophomore. Played well last year in his early appearance as a true freshman. I like to see what he continue to do. That's a very important spot there at left guard. Continue to play there. Damian George at right guard. You can kind of rotate. I think they're going to rotate and play a couple different people at right guard. They have a couple different options here. This offensive line is getting bulkier and bigger. I'm looking at right now. Two guys are 6'6", one guy's 6'7", 6'3", 6'4". These guys are all basically at least 300 pounds. A couple of them pushing a little bit higher into the 320s, 330 range. They're definitely bulking up, getting some big physical players down there on that offensive line in Florida.
In the running back room, they'll be blocking for, Montreal Johnson, a physical runner, can really rip off long runs. Good backside vision, patient runner. He's been a good pass blocker along with some ball security as well. The rest of the room's really not as polished after Etienne's departure. Treon Webb, a good runner who can make people miss. Has some toughness, isn't a bruiser or a burner though. Really has progressed this offseason. True freshman Jaden Baugh and Kenyon Daniels should be in the fold. Baugh, 230 pounds. Did a little bit of everything in high school. They consider him to be an outstanding character individual. Daniels was a top 200 recruit. Napier called him a tough, hard worker. I think this is a weak running back room overall, Nick, outside of Johnson. He's really good, but behind him, I don't know who's going to spell him when he gets tired.
This is a very weak running back room, and certainly the one part of this offense where you think it's a little bit iffy. Losing Etienne was a big blow. Now I know he has the off-the-field issues, which Florida kind of dodged a bullet there. Once he got to Georgia, he had some issues off the field, but still, Etienne's such a talented player, and losing him is tough. I have been high on Johnson since he arrived from Louisiana Lafayette. I think he's a fantastic back out of New Orleans, a guy that's really solid top to bottom. Really like what he can do. I think he will eclipse the 1,000-yard mark this year with the extra carries. 5 touchdowns last year. I'd like to see him get closer to 10. I think Webb is a very underrated player as well. I think Webb has a lot of potential to succeed in this new offense. He had 6.3 yards per carry in his limited grabs, so he is productive when he does get the ball. That's a solid 1-2 punch, but it's just one of the weaker ones in the SEC, and it definitely gets outclassed by some of these strong running back rooms we're going to see later down in the conference.
The offensive verdict for me, Mertz was stunning last year, and that included a largely youthful and shallow receiving group. Now you have Wilson, who's going to be a star. While talented other guys join the fold, and some young guys are going to gain some more experience. I definitely worry about the run game, as Johnson's going to have to carry a big load, and the offensive line was pretty upsetting last year. But the group up front is in much better shape. They should certainly clear 30 a game. They must continue to be creative, though, and I assume they will. I think Rob Sale's got a pretty good unit in store for 2024.
I think this is a good offense that has some nice potential. They were exceeded expectations last year, 28.4 points per game, a solid number, 409 yards per game. They could certainly be in that same ballpark. Losing Ricky Purcell and Trevor Etienne is a tough loss, but I think Montreal Johnson will step up, Gene Wilson will step up, and Mertz has been very reliable. Another year of learning the playbook. I think he's in line for some successes this year.
Looking at the defensive side of the ball, they lost 11 guys in the portal. Principally, Unimannellen being the most notable. They did add 7 guys, along with 6 returning starters. Only 2 of 44 players who recorded a tackle last year were listed as a senior. Only 10 were juniors. They were as young as it comes to at this side of the ball. The defensive line, the lack to get off, the inability to get off blocks, bad angles, missed tackles by the linebackers really hurt this defensive unit bad, especially against the run. Cameron Jackson, though, back on the defensive line, great size, 6'6", 360. Explosive power allows him to really dominate as a run stopper. Needs to improve his stamina, though. I think he does a solid job as a pocket pusher. Overall, needs to continue to develop a pass rushing plan, though. They picked up Joey Slackman, ex-wrestler. A lot of people wanted with great hands, nice, powerful build, good range. I think the lateral agility versus the run and the motor really stands out. He was an elite graded run defender. Obviously, that's going to dip a bit as he enters higher play. Needs to develop more counters as, more athletic offensive linemen certainly seem to plague him. He is a guy that was highly coveted, and he is a fourth quarter, game wrecker. He's a real competitive player in that aspect. Alongside Jackson, though, is Caleb Banks, 6'5", 325. He is a more advanced pass rusher, pretty adequate run defender. I think Jamari Lyons, a guy who saw action in year 2, was a solid run defender. Great tackler in the hole, though. 200 snaps played, missed 0 stops. 6'5", 305. I think he's got a great first step. a good A-gap attacker. And Desmond Watson really fell out of favor. They're as much better on the interior defensive line now. He's still at 6'4", 464. They're looking to hopefully get him back on track. And we'll talk about this when we talk about the edge department, Nick. But they've added a lot of size and talent to this defensive unit. And last year was a bit disappointing, but it's all right. We're getting a fresh start with some newer, fresher bodies in here, and I think they could certainly blossom.
This interior is certainly interesting when you look at Cam Jackson. I like him a lot. 32 total tackles last year, 2 pass breakups for him, gets his hand up on the line. Joey Slackman, a really interesting graduate add from the University of Penn in the Ivy League. Played at FCS level, obviously jumping into the SEC will be tough. But I think Slackman's a big guy, really solid in the interior, 6'3", 304. Excited to see what he can do. Caleb Banks, a good leader, 6'5", 325. 19 total tackles, 1.5 tackles for loss, 1 sack for him. Desmond Watson, that size is absolutely insane. I really thought I was misreading it when I first saw 464 for him. He is just huge on the interior there. Did not really have the best season last year, right? 11 tackles, 1 tackle for loss, 1 sack in 12 games. You want to see more production of him. Obviously, the stamina is a bit of an issue at that size. If he can find a way to be fully up to his potential at nose tackle, he could be a really solid player for this team. I do think there are some solid pieces here with those 4 guys that we just rattled off that do have potential to return and get some nice production.
You look at this edge department. They've lost some good players over the last couple of years. Antoine Powell-Ryland was great for Virginia Tech this past year. Princely Unamanellan departs for Ole Miss. So who do they have now? They have Tyreek Sapp. Really rose up in his 3rd year, should really take a leap. After being above average in all areas, 2 top 90 recruits in Cameron James. He's got good bend for being 6'6", 274. And then Kelby Collins, a versatile player that can win with heavy hands, speed, and a little bit of power as well. They're very excited for Justice Boone last year. I think it was a torn ACL that kept him out of favor in 2023. Really seems to fight opposing tackles well with his hands, though. So I think Boone's certainly going to be a big-time asset for them. George Gums added some production from NIU. TJ Searcy's also in the fold. And then you can't not mention LJ McCray, number 4 overall ranked recruit. Figures to play edge. Certainly needs to develop him, but can win inside or out as a pass rusher with length at 6'6". With better hands and power, he can really become an elite player. I think this Florida defensive line has lots of upsides. They've heavily recruited big bodies. Production was pretty horrific last year. They're outside the top 100 in sacks and tackles for loss. Struggled, again, the disengage versus the run. They need to step up immensely. And I think that's certainly in store, Nick, but it seems like the ceiling might be capped considering, they're giving up 300-plus yards to LSU, 200-plus to Arkansas. They were just having issues all over the board. They did do well against Florida State, so certainly the potential is there. But even early on in the year against Kentucky, Nick, they got absolutely folded against the run.
I have extreme concerns about this run defense. I think Tyreek Sapp's a great player. 24 total tackles, 4.5 tackles for loss, 2 sacks, plus a pick for him. Really solid coming off the edge, kind of play him on that right or flip to the left side if you can. Justice Boone, really excited about him. They're really hoping that he was going to be super productive, but obviously that injury, it's going to be tough to come back from ACL tear. If he can come back fully healthy, he'll be a really solid player at that jack position. With him at that jack position is TJ Searcy. I like Searcy a lot. 26 total tackles, 3.5 tackles for loss. Half a sack for him. I think he's a good player, top to bottom, that can have some potential to succeed. They brought in some solid recruits, like you mentioned, some guys that could really have an impact early on, which I think is important to note, that some of these 5-star recruits out of high school may get early action here for this team, considering where they're looking at in terms of depth on the depth chart. I think George Gums is a good add from NIU. I want to see what he can do. Overall, I do get worried about this front part of this defense because they were very poor against the run. They struggled to get sacks as well, and they are returning pretty much all the faces without adding that big marquee game guy out of the portal, you would hope, and you lose Princely, who was really productive for this team. I don't know if they're going to be able to get the sacks they're going to need to get, and I'm certainly worried about that.
The biggest reason I'm probably concerned about the runs is probably not the D-line, but probably the linebacking core. Shamar James, they obviously struggled with him on the field, but got even worse, it seemed, with him out. Good athletic stature, has nice closing speed, can often give up some outside leverage in the run game, wiped out by vertical blocks. Obviously, that's a concern. Miles Graham, 114th overall ranked true freshman, has athleticism to make sideline-to-sideline plays, high football IQ, does well moving downhill, diagnosing the run is certainly a big strength for him. The group was often out of place, though. They lacked physicality and patience, only got worse after Shamar got hurt. Inability to contain. Bad vision hurt them versus Daniels and LSU. I'll allude to that in a second. They did add Grayson Howard from South Carolina. Was a pretty elite tackler as a rotational piece. Probably going to be the weak side starter for them. Derek Wingo, a senior, has experience. He's been below average. Going to be some middle linebacker depth. Manny Naraney, weak side backup, also struggled in his increased role. Biggest reason I have some type of hope, though, is because Ron Roberts has, some work to do, and he's been a pretty good linebacking coach. in his tenure as a coach. I think Mason Graham, though, or Miles Graham, that is, will probably need to play a good bit more. And what I was referring to against LSU, Nick, is first play of the drive, they had two linebackers overcommit against Daniels on the read option. No one was aware that he could probably keep the ball, and what do you know? He goes 85 yards for a rushing touchdown. I don't know. Are we not watching film, or are we just really that bad at football players?
Certainly a bad look for that defense. I know exactly which play you're talking about. I've watched that as well. Very poor look from both of them linebackers in that situation. If one overcommits there, normally if your guy is a backup to provide coverage, but both of them overcommit, and Daniels absolutely torches you and shows you why. He was such a talented quarterback at LSU. Shamar James, I think he's a player that is really the heartbeat of this defense, a great player, middle linebacker. He played in only 8 games, had 54 total tackles, the second leading tackler on the team last year, even though he only played in 8 games, 5.5 tackles for loss plus a sack. Derek Wingo, a guy who tried to step up towards the end of the season, had 3.5 tackles for loss, 2.5 sacks, and 17 total tackles when he got a bit of an increased role in the last 4 games this season. Grayson Howard's a good add from South Carolina at 6'4", 235. I think he's a good, solid piece to have there as your wide linebacker. This unit is certainly weaker than other units on this team. I think James is a good player who, if he's fully healthy, he could be the top tackler on this team for sure. Good, hard-hitting guy, but they got to figure out these reads. They got to be better at dissecting quarterback runs potentially, and just got to be better at making tackles overall.
He wasn't any better in the secondary. They were one of the nation's worst in numerous categories, 132nd in INTs, only 3. And then same number, 132nd and 30-plus yard passes allowed. I think there's a lot of potential for this unit, though. Jason Marshall hasn't exactly blown up into that elite player we expected him to, but this is still a player with good instincts and anticipation. He was very physical and really good in run support last year. Did have 10 pass breakups. Also allowed the nation's second worst mark of 24 yards per catch. Only allowed a completion rate of 44%, though. So the definition of an up and down year, but he was probably the most stable of the group. Safety Jordan Castell, a guy with good size and length, is certainly on display. Fluid in coverage, due to his high school cornerback experience. Impressive movement for being, he was about 220 pounds, down to about 207 now. Doesn't always show good fundamentals versus the run, but he does understand leverage, forces guys back inside. He was the leading tackler as a true freshman. He's going to be an elite player for them. Devin Moore, once again showed that promise that I alluded to last year. Health has plagued him, though. He's a good tackler in run support, was great in coverage. I think this gives UF a good duo if they're clicking. I think Marshall and Moore certainly going to be really good. Jakeem Jackson showed some, good ball skills, but had some bumps as well as a true freshman. He was the 49th overall ranked recruit in the class of 23. Deshaun Johnson, a 4-star that flipped from Ohio State. Physical guy that's a good feeler in coverage, great change of direction and speed. Another group where depth is kind of scattered with youth, but lots of promise. The slot is definitely questionable. They lose Jaden Hill. DJ Douglas arrives from Tulane, though, could be the saving grace. Spent most of his time at deep safety, played very well when asked to play in the slot, though, over the final month of the year. And then another guy they pick up in Turquoise Bridges. He didn't really emerge as I expected last year as a corner for Oregon. Has good speed. They're likely going to move him back to his natural position as safety. Bryce Thornton, he started a good bit at the end of the year. Asa Turner, he should be penciled in the starting lineup as well. A good veteran coming over from Washington. Great length, a good tackler. Rarely allows big plays in coverage. Run-stopping prowess as well. His return from injury late in the year was big for the Huskies. This is a secondary, Nick. I think they're going to improve immensely, right? And I certainly said that about the defensive line as well. But I think they have the right components here. They just have to be better and more in tune, and I think with more experience, these guys will certainly do so. But it's going to start with Marshall and Moore living up to the expectations I'm putting on them.
A very young secondary last year that's going to get better as time goes on. Jordan Castell, leading tackler for this team as a true freshman last year, 60 total tackles, 1.5 tackles for loss, a pick, and 3 pass breakups. Always great to get your top tackler back. Such a young player. Slimmed down a little bit like him at free safety. I think Jason Marshall is a really good leader for this team. 26 total tackles, 3.5 tackles for loss, a sack, 10 pass breakups. Great numbers from Marshall. They're a really good veteran leader, 6 foot, 205. I like him a lot. Devin Moore, when he's healthy, he's really solid. Very limited actions last year, 3 pass breakups for him. Dylan Johnson, a good player who appeared late in games as a true freshman, has some opportunity to grow. I think there's some solid players here. Jakeem Jackson's another guy that could really rotate at right cornerback, really solid player. I like these portal adds, the 3 guys that we rattled off. DJ Douglas previously was at Alabama before going to Tulane, so has some SEC experience. Asa Turner was a really good player at Washington who was solid in the second half of the season. They're a bigger guy at 6'3", 212. I like him at strong safety. And the Turquoise Bridges, I was disappointed in him at Oregon, but he's a guy that still has sky-high potential. Has got some reps, though, for the Ducks. A solid player, top to bottom, a highly rated recruit at a high school. Bridges could be a really solid player in rotation. in the safety position as well. This secondary unit definitely has a lot of room to grow. They need to have improvement from last year. They certainly did not live up to expectations despite being young last year. 226.7 pass yards per game was a little too much of a number to give up, 70th in the nation. They're going to have to find a way to cut that number down.
Defensive verdict, the unit has a lot of promise. I think Napier's done a good job beefing up the trenches. But this is the year for them to unleash that and be productive and impactful. Middle of the defense is a concern, just not all that filled out. But Ron Roberts should give them more in tune, I think, than they were a season ago. Secondary, shares the same sentiment as the D-line, as they have a nice cornerback duo. I think some depth that can really elevate this pass defense. Great ads in the portal and the high school ranks, while Castell should contend as maybe one of the nation's top safeties. I think vast improvement is imminent. And that leads us to our prediction, Nick. I've certainly, I alluded to it at the top of the show, correctly predicted this team's record 2 straight seasons down to a T. I think the biggest question will, this ungodly schedule is how much do you think they progress? If they are winning downfield with speed in the passing game, if the D-line is, doubling up its production, that's going to dictate games like Ole Miss, LSU, and maybe even Georgia, where they've, been able to compete for a couple of minutes in those games. And, Florida has an offense that can really spark something big due to the wide receiver group's potential of a QB that showed nice precision, while the retooling up front could benefit them big time. And again, defensively they were quite poor last year. Nice growth potential up front and in the secondary, and I think they do showcase improvements. I think you'll see great energy in those home games, and that's going to be the difference maker versus these tougher opponents. And I think desperation mode's certainly going to kick in, Nick. They're not losing to Miami. They have no choice. They can't lose that game. You cannot start 0-1 with what remains. At home against UCF's a bit of a trap game. I think Kentucky's going to be tough, LSU as well. But I think, again, at home, those are games they're going to win, and I think they could even knock off Ole Miss as well. But sometimes we forget in college football, progression is real, home environment is real, and I think 7-5 is going to be one of the higher predictions you'll see. But no one's been better than me the last couple seasons, Nick, and I see this is how it's going to play out with home environment reigning supreme.
Have to absolutely give props to Billy Napier and the Florida athletic department for going out and scheduling this tough schedule. There's really no absolute gimmies on this schedule other than Sanford, and then you want to throw Mississippi State in there as a gimme. When you look at conference play, I've been to the Swamp. I've taken a game in there. One of the toughest places to play, in my opinion, the loudest stadium that I've ever been to, and I've been to most of the SEC stadiums at this point in my life. Florida was unreal. The Swamp was absolutely rocking. It is deafening in that stadium. When this team is winning and playing good football, it is impossible to hear yourself think in that stadium. That atmosphere is just one of a kind. They got to set the tempo early against Miami. If they lose that game, like you said, that is a brutal start to the season. They're going to find themselves in a deep hole. They got to go out and win that game on August 31st. A tough matchup against a really good team from the ACC, an in-state rivalry, a team that they hate. They got to go out there and beat Miami. I think, Texas A&M at home early on, they might be able to catch A&M lacking. That's a tough game for them. Certainly A&M could be a little bit caught off guard as they're still kind of beginning to build with their new head coach down there in College Station. I think the UCF game is also a tough game, right? UCF, they had a better than expected season in the Big 12. They contended with Oklahoma in a close game down in Norman. So that's a team that's not afraid to play on the road. At Tennessee is a tough game. Kentucky and Georgia back-to-back at home. I think they're going to lose that game to Kentucky. That is one of the games that I flipped compared to you. I also flipped. I think they're going to lose to Texas A&M early in the season. Kentucky, a very good team. Georgia, obviously, a really incredible team. At Texas, tough game. LSU at home, I think they will win that game against the Tigers. I do agree with you there. That is a tough matchup, though, with an Ole Miss and Florida State to end the season, traveling to Florida State. We know Florida State, as a whole, that team is very amped up after what happened last year. They want to go continue to put a point together this season with what is a really solid roster over there for one of their bigger rivals over there in Tallahassee at a great stadium down there as well. Tough schedule. Like I said, props to the administration for putting together this ridiculous schedule, toughest in the nation by a country mile. I think Billy Napier should keep his job regardless of what the record is. If it is 5-7, they're going to be calling for his head down there in Gainesville because they expect results immediately. I think you have to kind of build up slowly in the new NIL era, and they're getting things started, in my opinion. They're putting together a good roster. I think firing Napier would be the wrong decision, but I can certainly see why they want to make that move after another losing season. Absolutely brutal schedule, though.
And that's what I tell people. The biggest thing you want to see with Florida this year is the end result when your season end record, if it is 5-7 or somehow worse, you don't want to look at that. You want to see how this team competes, and you saw it last year. The Arkansas game was disappointing. On the road at South Carolina, down double figures late. Thought that was game over. They fought back and won. Backup quarterback at Missouri. Should have won that game. Played very hard, even if it was, not Jordan Travis led Florida State. They played very hard against a very impressive Knowles team. This is a team that battled and fought hard, and that's what you're going to want to look for this upcoming season is how do they play? Do they give up on their coach? They play with high energy, especially in those home games, and that's what they did last year, Nick. And I certainly think you're going to see them continue to buy into this culture. And that's the biggest thing you want to see with the Gators this season. I think this is an interesting ball club. 7 wins for me. It's going to be it for today's episode, Nick. As always, appreciate you joining.
Super excited to see what this Florida team does this year. Tough schedule, but I think Billy Napier's a fantastic coach. I think he has proven that he's a good recruiter as well, putting together a solid class. If you give him a little more time down there in Gainesville, I think results will come soon.
Make sure you guys like, comment, subscribe. See you next time.